Presentación. Y si usted está llamando desde la aplicación de Zoom en su celular, haga clic en los tres puntos que aparecen en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y luego interpretación de idiomas, español y finalizar. Thank you. Gracias. Presentación. Y si usted está llamando desde la aplicación de Zoom en su celular, haga clic en los tres puntos que aparecen en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y luego interpretación de idiomas, español y finalizar. Thank you. Gracias.
This is Kira speaking. Thank you so much, interpreters, for helping make our session today a multilingual space. For those of you that are joining in person or joining us on YouTube, the language interpretation is on the Zoom platform. So thank you for bearing with us as we get through those important accessibility notes. So to get us started, hi, hello, welcome. My name is Kira Wisniewski. I have the honor and privilege of being the executive director here at Art+Feminism. We are so excited to have this program today featuring a conversation with two really incredible artists that are doing really exciting work with AI and data in their practice. But before we get started, just a couple housekeeping things. I do want to share about our practices for improved access. So we ask that speakers say your name before you speak. So for instance, this is Kira speaking. We also want to make sure that we pause for access. So if there are issues with the audio, if speakers are speaking too quickly, please feel free to interject so we can make sure that we are keeping an accessible session for today. If you're joining online, I want to highlight that you can, of course, use the turn on your captions and ask that we also pay attention to the chat while also describing images on the screen. And then also, this is mostly an invitation for our Zoom participants, but really the invitation to utilize your space and whatever works for you. So that means if it's camera on or camera off, if you want to sit, if you want to stand, whatever like helps you be the most present in the space, we invite you to do. And we want to thank People Hub for giving us their training and guidelines to help us create more access-centered cultures in our work. I also want to share an abbreviated version of our Brave Friendly Spaces agreement. The goal of this session is to create an encouraging space for collective learning. This requires intentional behavior where participants are conscious of and accountable for the effects of their statements and actions on others. We respect our experiences and the experience of others and recognize we can't do this work without one another. We agree to hold each other accountable to foster this brave and friendly space. So with that, I'm going to hit record on this session, and I'm going to hand it over to you all in Berlin.
Recording in progress.
Hi, Celine. I'm sorry. I am getting a message that the YouTube stream can't hear your audio. So sorry to interrupt, but we want to make sure that they can hear you on the stream. I can hear you, but
I can hear you.
yeah, we can hear in the Zoom, but it seems that the YouTube stream cannot hear.
Oh,
So I do apologize for the delay, but we are just making sure that we can get everyone to hear what's happening in Berlin. And thanks for those joining on YouTube. I do see that unfortunately the captions aren't working right now, so we're going to try to look at that as well. Sorry and thanks for bearing with us as we try to work through this. As you can see, there are people running around in the in the Berlin office trying to make it work. I am not getting confirmation from the YouTube that it's working yet. We can make a pivot though, if I might suggest. Initially, we were keeping the Zoom for interpretation only, but what I can do right now is I can send the Zoom link to those registrants. And perhaps that might be an easier way for people to hear the audio for the time being. Is it working now? If people joining us on YouTube can confirm if you hear any sound now, please let us know. Yeah, I don't see confirmation yet. I'm going to move forward with inviting people who registered to the Zoom. So if you are joining by YouTube right now, please check your email in just a moment. I need to trying to navigate over to that space to do that. Thank you again for your patience. And all right, just one more moment. Okay, if you all who are joining us by YouTube can check your email, there should be a link in your email. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but really appreciate you all sticking with us and moving through this. So I'm gonna pause the recording right now.
Recording stopped.
There are only so many things that we could test ahead of time. So really appreciate you all joining here. All right. So folks are now joining us. Thank you again for everyone's patience. And thanks, everyone. Yeah, we just give it one more moment as we are getting some folks over here from the YouTube into the Zoom so that they can hear us. And those of you who are asking about the Zoom link, in the YouTube channel. Unfortunately, because that's public, we in our digital security, we won't be sharing that link in the chat on YouTube. Please check your email for those who have pre-registered. There, of course, will be a recording of this session as well. So again, thank you so much for your patience and your flexibility and grace as we make sure that everybody can hear the presentation and the conversation. Jade, I'm going to go ahead and help you out here too. All right, Celine, I think we're ready to get going.
Great. Everyone sees me, hears me. Are you ready to go?
Recording in progress.
Okay, great. Then maybe I will just start again for the people who were not able to hear at the beginning, but I will make it even shorter so we move ahead. So I'm Solène Lazare. I'm the head of product strategy for Wikimedia Germany. We are very honored and happy to co-host this event with Art and Feminism today. And to get started, I wanted to give a bit of an introduction of what we do, especially in regard to Wikidata and the Wikibase ecosystem, and maybe give a perspective on how data shapes AI and how together we can also shape AI. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Wikidata. So what is Wikidata? It is what we call a knowledge graph. So it is a structured data repository that allows to combine all the data in the world, all the knowledge of the world, ideally like a Wikipedia does. So you can imagine almost like a machine-readable Wikipedia that you can build applications with, that you can train LLMs on, and also create art, as we're going to see today. So that's what Wikidata is, and it is the biggest collaborative knowledge graph in the world. It has more than 116 million data items, so you can imagine the size of it. But Wikidata, next slide, please. Wikidata is not. Oh yes, sorry. So that's a bit an idea of how Wikidata works. So the idea is that it's not data that is listed by themselves, but they are always interconnected. And because they are interconnected, we can travel with them in terms of meaning. We can also extract data in a different way. And that's also the reasons why so many researchers are using Wikidata, because you can draw more like new conclusions as the data is connected to each other. Next slide, please. And then I want to talk a little bit about Wikibase, because the people who know a little bit the ecosystem of Wikidata might know Wikidata, but not necessarily a Wikibase. So Wikibase is a software, and it is the software on which Wikidata is built. It is a software that allows people to build these knowledge graphs. Next slide, please. And it is a free software, so if some of you actually have are part of a community or have access to some kind of archives, you can definitely create your own Wikibase to combine your own data and to make it accessible to other people in the world. So Wikidata is an instance of this software Wikibase. Next slide, please. But it is not the only one. So we're going to have a lot of what we call GLAM institutions, so galleries, libraries, archives, museums, which have Wikibase instances, national libraries, but also sometimes small marginalized communities, which create these instances to be able to preserve their data. And the strength of what we are building is that all of these instances, they are connected to each other, and you can use, for example, the way of modeling data from Wikidata, if that makes sense, or you can refer Wikidata, but also query from 2 wiki bases at once, including Wikidata. So this is the strength of this network, which is what we call a linked open data way of thinking about the world. Yeah, so before I move on to diversity and representation, maybe last point on reuse. So we have a lot of data, as I've just mentioned. And of course, the goal is not to just keep this data on this beautiful knowledge graph. It is to enable people to reuse this data and create more value, create more findings, draw more conclusions in the world. So our data is effectively being used by many public institutions. As I mentioned, a lot of the GLAM institutions use it, researchers, but also software developers. They can build applications. We have APIs. And as we're going to see today, also artists can create art from the data that we have. So Wikidata's data is effectively everywhere. Also, the tech giants are also using it to train their AI. And that gives us a unique kind of responsibility, because if our data is everywhere, that means that any kind of maybe problems in the representation that we might have will be duplicated and will be enhanced just by the fact that AI models are trained on it. So next slide, please. I'm gonna start, yeah. So that's kind of what I was discussing right now, right? If we have data that is biased, that doesn't represent entirely the reality, what will happen when we have AI models that are trained on it is that all these biases, all these silences, all these omissions, they will find themselves again in the AI models. And what we see in our communities is that historically we have had more contributors that are from North America, from Europe. They tend to be more white and male. That is what we have as a community historically. And that is something that we acknowledge, and we have really made a lot of efforts to do outreach programs to reach out to underrepresented or marginalized communities. We also spend a lot of time supporting education. We train some communities, and we try to onboard them to reduce the barriers to entry in becoming an editor or contributor for Wikidata. So first, my invitation, next slide. My first invitation will be to please join us. We invite all of you, whether you are an artist, a scholar, an activist, technologist, maybe just a curious citizen, to engage with Wikidata and the Wikibase ecosystem. Add your knowledge, add your histories, your perspective, because that will help us diversify the map and create a base of data that will be more diverse and more representative of the real world. Next slide. Now I want to talk to you about our embedding project, which is something that we released this week. And it is a project that will help us to take a major step towards making a structured and verifiable knowledge more directly usable by AI systems. And I think at Wikimedia we have acknowledged that AI is here to stay, and AI is a very important way that we consume knowledge today. So if we want to continue our mission to diffuse knowledge, we have to work with the way that AI is built and contribute our stone in this big in this big building in order to bring our values of verifiability, trustworthiness, but also a more equitable view of the world. And so, next slide. And so our embedding project is basically creating a vector-based semantic search. So I'm going to try to summarize it in a way that everyone can understand. So basically, this project turns Wikidata's data into mathematical representation that we call embeddings. And basically, they are like numerical vectors that capture meaning. And it enables us to, instead of searching by keywords, so the exact words that I'm typing, if I'm typing dog, I'm going to get all the results of dogs. I'm going to be able to search by meaning and finding related concepts, even if they are described differently. And this is how we are able to train AI systems and LLMs. And moreover, what we're also doing is we are making Wikidata compatible with the technologies and the standards that are being used in the AI industry today. So we are using a technology that's basically a connector, it's like plumbing between AI system and data sources being us. So we are using the standard plumbing that they use in the industry so that the AI systems, but also everyone here who wants to train models can start using our data in a way that is the most efficient. And why are we doing all of this, and why am I telling you all of this? It would be a very good question. Our goal here is to really reduce hallucination and improve the verifiability. So because we do all of this, when you're going to ask some question in our vector database, you're going to have the reference to the exact item that we are mentioning in Wikidata. And that avoids the effect that we have all seen on ChatGPT when you ask a question and it literally invents a result. So because of this, we are able to avoid that problem. And generally, it is also open source, it is public infrastructure that is available and transparent, and it is basically an alternative to proprietary AI systems. And I think the message here is that powerful AI does not have to be controlled by a handful of companies. It can be open, collaborative, and built by everyone to serve everyone. So I'm going to leave you with maybe 3 concluding statements. First, the responsibility is collective. As I just mentioned, we can all add data, contribute data, and make this base data that we train AI on more fair and more representative of the world. So again, an invitation to all contribute to this. Secondly, the tools are actually available, but they need participation. You can engage with the tools that we're discussing here, even the embedded project that I just mentioned. If you are an AI engineer, you can make us feedback, you can engage with this. And maybe a last thought is that sometimes it might feel that we don't have power over against the internet giants, and they shape the way the future is going to look at. But if you think about it, one of the biggest tools of all the AI that is being trained by Google, by Meta, and by OpenAI is actually Wikipedia, Wikidata, and all of these collaborative databases. So once again, we have a power if we all contribute, and we can make the world a bit fairer. So that was all for me as an introduction to this big topic. And we're going to hear from our artist next.
Hi, this is Kira speaking. Thanks so much, Celine. As I go into the introduction for the artist, I just want to really, again, just be thankful for you all in helping us co-host this important conversation together. We're really excited about all the work that you all are doing at Wiki Deutschland, and then how that really kind of coincides with a lot of the goals that we have as an organization to really do this work together. So we're really thankful again for this opportunity to be working with you all today in partnership. And yes, so now I do want to get us over to our speakers. I will allow them to kind of introduce themselves, but we are so delighted to be having this conversation today with Nora and Michael, both really leading artists in their fields, really doing some really, really exciting work. So please help me welcome them to the virtual and physical stage in Berlin.
Thanks so much for the warm words. I'm Nora Al-Badri. Okay, self-introduction is very difficult always. I'm a conceptual media artist, actually based in Berlin, German, Iraqi. my practice is very, in a way, anti-colonial, and I hope it speaks more or less for itself. So I will briefly, because we don't have so much time to present, rather a conversation between us artists and between us and you, hopefully. That would be really nice. So yeah, I really hope what I'm going to present will speak for itself. So do we see actually some slides already? Or I will still try this one. So no, but maybe do I control it? Okay, don't worry. Don't worry. I usually start my presentations and I can do it by just reading the quote on a slide. It's a quote from a very important post-colonial thinker. His name was Edward Said. And he says, quote, "Ideas, cultures, and histories cannot seriously be understood or studied without their force, or more precisely, their configurations of power also being studied." So when we as artists and when I in my practice use AI, I really try to address the issues of power that are inherent, and we have already heard today, like about the problems of representation, for example, and I guess power in general. And I had a lot of questions when I heard your nice presentation about, yeah, how everyone can contribute. Oh yeah, that's it, you know, decolonizing data, art and museums. So maybe next slide already, that's the quote. That's, yeah, in the end, it's about creating value too. And if the big tech companies are using the data, I think in the end they should pay one way or the other for it too. So the next, I'll only briefly introduce two projects of mine that are AI, where I collaborate with AI. I use AI since almost 10 years, so I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out because. Oh no. Don't worry, don't worry. I hope not because of my presentation. Yeah, it's okay. Did I say something crashable? The big tech is really bad. um, or maybe it was Edward. Edward's quote.
This is Kira. We can hear you fine in Zoom.
Okay, you can hear me and see everything?
Yes, we see the slide deck right now. Thank you.
Okay, so next slide, please. So yeah, I'll briefly introduce two works of mine. The first is Babylonian Vision. Next slide, please. It's a work I did at a university in Switzerland, EPFL, for technology. And I worked with the programmers Nega Furutan and Melika Bejati. And what we did and what I do in a lot of my projects actually work more like about GLAM institutions, or what I like to call big cultural data, meaning in my case it's mostly data from the archives of museums that have actual artifacts, like that have an actual material to them, and how they are digitized. And then I think in general that the digital version, be it a 3D data set or just an image of the object, kind of becomes an artifact on its own, not just a copy of the original or so, because now we live in a post-digital world where that makes the institutions theoretically more accessible, the collections more visible. But we are facing one other power problem here, is that the most valuable collections from the whole world are actually stored in the global north. So, for example, in Berlin, we have huge collections, or in the Louvre or British Museum, of the whole world, basically. And what does it mean for them also to open their archives? And I think there are really many good examples where they give access and APIs to everyone to work with their artifacts, or to, let's say, inquire the archives. But then there are really many other bad examples and yeah, I don't know, I wouldn't name them now necessarily. Everyone knows like which archives are accessible and which aren't, that don't make it accessible. And it's interesting because I think it's about power in the end as well, that in Germany we have the word Deutungshoheit. That means the power of representation also, sovereignty of meaning, something like this. And that means who owns the data, who owns the object, who owns the data can also narrate what it means, and in this case narrate actually like human history from many small communities to many big civilizations and so on and so forth. So with Babylonian Vision, it was more an autobiographical project of mine in the sense that I went back to the land where my father comes from, Iraq, that used to be one part Babylon, but then also Turkey and Iran and Syria, for example. And what we did was we were scraping. Actually, I asked like the biggest collection in the collections, 5 museums, to share the data with us for this. Also, it was a research project too from the university, and they didn't do it. So then what we ended up doing was scraping their databases, potentially through Wikidata too, but not only, and using then around 10,000 images. So next slide maybe, yeah. To generate, to train a generative adversarial network. That's what it's called. It's a different technology like LLMs, and for image making, it's a very relevant still tool because it's a bit more precise in a way. And it doesn't just copy what you input, but it actually generates something new. And it's not just a remix because it learns image worlds. But I'll try to show it to you a little bit more from scratch. So these were the outputs of what I like to sometimes call techno-heritage, because it's a fictional fictional objects, but they actually are directly referenced to the specific time and location, in this case Babylon, and Mesopotamian, Neo-Sumerian, Assyrian cultures. And next slide, please. So these are a few of the input objects of the 10,000. Just to give you an idea, it was a very heterogeneous data set. I shouldn't talk so fast. That means it was jewelry, textiles, objects, like sculptures, and many broken pieces, of course, pots. So it was actually not an easy task for us and the GANs to generate something meaningful. So next slide, please. And next one too. Just to say that the GANs, I always like to take one step back, is they never see an image, of course, only numbers, but through the numbers they can actually make sense of it. And what it is very good for, I think, is to get a sense and to kind of wander through this image worlds. And next slide, how it looks as an exhibition is like this, for example. You see like individual objects as a projection where they develop through, where they meander, let's say, in the so-called latent space, because there is not just one possibility of image generation, but many. And this is the beauty, and also I think some critique of it, that it's a bit random, I guess, the form of image making, but you could also say it's really compelling in a way. It's like surprises the artist and the viewer to what comes out of it. Yeah, next slide, please. To give you an idea how that looks during the training, actually, this is the process of iterations the neural network actually does to learn about the visual language of everything. And here you can still see the remnants of the museum, like the colorful scales that we actually removed for the training data because it was too distracting. It's not the object itself, but it's still relevant. So in some publications or so, I still show this as a print to see this is the reference, this is where we got it from, and this is how it's actually represented in archives, and probably how other AIs are then using it or seeing it, I guess. So next slide. Next, because some images are not working or videos are not working. Next slide, please. Next one. Because I think, yeah, we are also in a setting today, we have many students joining us. I wanted to talk a bit about this method for a moment with a quote from Nora Khan from the US, another Nora in this field, and I'm reading it. In fact, our rational understanding of the process, how GANs work, actually helps us enter how provocative this method of image creation is, and with this understanding we can linger, analyzing, close reading the image flow for symbols and meaning. I think she really put it together beautifully, what the strength of this method is. So next slide, maybe, yeah. Because we don't have the, some videos don't work here, unfortunately, but here you can see a little bit the evolvement of, or this basically a way to look at the latent space just in film stills. Okay, I think I need to run through it. So 3 more slides further, like jump to the next 2, please. Next one, and stay. Next one. Stay here for a second because it's important in the practice when I use, let's say, this cultural big data from global northern museums. This is the other tech reality that you talked about earlier, and I think it's really telling a lot, and that most of the training data, I think around 80%, still comes from the global north. So that means actually many of the models can even not really understand other image worlds. So this was a way of creating a southern data set to just put together these cultural artifacts and train and model on it. And the other way, what I try in my practice usually is to kind of use the mechanisms in the technology to do something different. That means since until today, AI somehow is difficult to, yeah, I don't know, this black box problem to see where the source data actually comes from. And this is one of the biggest problems with the big companies too, that, yeah, no one can, we don't know it, basically. And in this project, this part was actually something really emancipatory, because the museums cannot tell me that actually use their data to create these new objects. So this black box problem thing can also be something really emancipatory. So I hope that makes sense how I explained it now. Next slide, please. So the next piece, the Post-Truth Museum, talks about a similar similar problem in a way. Where is it? It's a recent work, like from 1 year ago, so I haven't really talked so much about it before. So forgive me a little bit. It's a total mix of AI technologies, actually, ranging from a regular deepfake AI video, but it's also a collage and avatar generation, stable diffusion, image generation, text-to-speech, and voice cloning inside it. And I brought just a short excerpt to show it to you, and I hope that says more than I can say about it. So it's a work that tries to subvert the idea of identity theft that is happening in Western museums. That means if you own the material of a culture, you kind of can narrate their story, like I said, and you, in part, really own the culture. And as long as the museums are holding on to their artifacts, they actually do some form of identity theft of entire cultures, I'd say. But for me, in a way, this was a very important project to... I was very tired of criticizing the museum about restitution, and the work Post-Truth Museum is actually a way to try to paint a picture of what a future could for a museum could be. And the performed texts you will hear, they are all contributed by important scholars in this field. So yeah, in the field of art history and I don't know, museums, anthropology, that really worked in the past decade in about restitution mainly, and about the nature of museums. And these collective voices range from the very sensitive to the furious. And I thought AI itself is also a collective thing, technology, so it really fits well bringing this together. Okay, let's, without just look at a few minutes from the video, and I hope that makes sense for you. And keep in mind the concept of identity theft here, please. No? Okay, maybe let's have it played a little bit in the background. There is some sound and speech, of course, but it has also subtitles. And yeah, just. It's not the same. Maybe we can also share the link to a trailer of the video work later somewhere in the chat or so. That would be an option. So you can at least see a part of it. And but the idea is really just to try to use a deep fake that usually is something exploitative and that doesn't really look at privacy issues at all, to use these three figures and who are leading like all directors of Louvre British Museum and Berlin Museum or Cultural Foundation, and put words in their mouth they would not speak, but words of care, and to have the objects actually narrate their stories. Like, I always thought a lot about what would they actually say if they could speak. And there are like many texts written that I think are really much more in their on their side, or and just to close it, one thing that is really important, I think, for in this moment now with all the video and image generation, somehow what I really find the most relevant and interesting conceptual aspect of AI for artists, but probably it's true for everyone, is the aspect of its inherent collectivity. But also to see the subjectivity of it, like what is the data, what is the canon, where that comes from. And also with the image generation, it's very interesting, this kind of essence of images, but it also means at the same time some form of quantification. So a translation from the image to numbers, and therefore a simplification of the reality, how we perceive it, I believe. So maybe let's stop here and then we'll have a conversation later. Thank you so much.
Hi. My name is Michael Mandenberg. My pronouns are they, them. I am a co-founder, one of the co-founders of Art+Feminism. I'm also an artist and researcher. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project I'm working on right now. Can I have the next slide? I have collected 130 million stock photographs. Stock photographs are the photographs that show up on advertisements, are all around us. Can we get the slide? Or nope, my presentation. Images. Is there another presentation that I sent over?
Hi, this is Kira. Sanjay, it should be slide 22. So you need to go ahead a couple more slides.
Yes, Perfect. Next slide. Okay, got that. Next slide. Stock photographs. You're familiar with these. They're all around us. I see them on the streets here in Berlin even. Next slide. So I made videos and photographs from these. Next slide. They look like this. I'm going to show this to you, and in the process sort of explain how I got there to help you understand what's going on and what it tells us about the way in which this data is structured. Next slide. So stock photography has biases. We've talked a little bit about biases. We've talked a little about representation. Next slide. AI is learning them because AI, next slide. Stock photography is one of the key data sets that is sort of, there's a kind of a layer cake of data that's being fed into these models. Wikipedia and Wikidata are kind of at the bottom of it as a kind of foundation. And then there's all the internet. And then at the top, as far as images, is actually Shutterstock, and Adobe has trained their own model almost entirely off of their own stock photography. Next slide. So AI tools treat stock photography as factual information, but they're actually far from neutral. Next slide. I wanted to know what was in these images. Next slide. Which is to say, what is AI learning about us? Next slide. So coming back to this image I flashed up here earlier, like, what is stock photography telling us about what it means to be a person in the world? Well, first of all, if you're a woman, you should have long hair. If you're at work, it should be up. In fact, most everyone here is at work. Most of the people here are white, and they're all conventionally attractive. And that's what's getting fed into the models. Next slide. So I scraped 130 million images. These are the sites that they came from. Next slide. And immediately some really interesting facets of the data were revealing themselves. I thought that the images would be coming from the US, Western Europe, etc., but in fact they're not predominantly. They're predominantly made in the former Soviet Union. Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Poland, and the former Eastern Bloc countries. Also, Spain is quite large, Thailand's large, both of which produce more than the US. Next slide. I made two analyses of these to make the works that I showed you before. The first is about keywords, and the second is about bodies. Next slide. So when I analyze the keywords, they use a machine learning tool that allows you to find the words that are located next to each other. And so unsurprisingly, the largest topic is people at work. The next one is fashion beautiful. The next one after that is people described based off of the clothing they're wearing. Next slide. And when you look at the ethnicity and gender in these, there's a correlation between gender and ethnicity. The whiter a topic is, the more women are in it. The topics down there at the corner that are the most have the most predominant are fashion, beautiful, skincare, makeup, and weddings. And these, of course, are the images that are telling AI what beauty is. There's lots of images in the mix, but these are the ones with the richest metadata. When I analyze the bodies, I'm finding the faces where they're looking and the expressions that they're making, as well as the hand shape, the three-dimensional hands, and the hand-body location. Next slide. And from this, I'm able to make groupings. So this is the same face position, the same hand position, but a different gesture. I'm able to sort of isolate these gestures that are present in the data. Next slide. Which is how I end up getting this. This is topic 63, which is phone mobile communication, pose 23, which is hands at heart center, and then gesture 21, which is a kind of both palms facing up 45 degrees and towards the body. Next slide. These are the latent images in the data set. Next slide. Here's a few of them. I'm just going to move through them quickly. Next slide. like sign. Yeah, you can go through them. And I think that there's a video, but I think we'll skip it. Let's just skip this one. Next. So looking at different sets of data from a different perspective, but also looking at some of the things about what's there, what's not there, and why it isn't there. So that's what I wanted to share about my work as a grounding, and maybe we can have a bit of a conversation and then some questions. Yes? You wanna come on? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Excellent. So I guess I would start with a question. I have two questions that sort of get at where you arrive at this from, and I'm going to ask both of them and let you pick whichever one you want to answer. One of which is, how did you start working with these data sets and these tools? Did it arise from an interest in the tools themselves, or were they tools that allowed you to answer a question that you were exploring? Which is another way of asking, like, when you approach these things, did you find the data first and then start asking questions of it? Or did you have questions and then did you go find the data? Or is it like a big mix-up of the both?
It's more like a mess. Yeah, it's actually not really. It's a very good question, and I would need to think really long about it, because my first reaction would be really that in my practice I used really in the past very different technologies, but since AI was accessible, I actually always used it in many different ways. I don't know which year that was, but before we even had chatbots, I did a funny chatbot. No, it was actually a really serious one, and people were thinking like, what the hell is going on here? Because when we talk about feminism later, it was a time, I think Syria already started to be there. And I remember it's always a bit by chance, I think, because in Berlin we have a great open source scene. So I had some friends in a hackerspace, and they were like, we have this great open software platform with a new general AI. Do you want to make an art piece with it? And I was like, that's not how it works. But actually, a little bit, it is how it works. So I looked at it and I thought, why did you give it a female name at that time? Whatever. But then I actually was able to build myself, because they made it so accessible that it was quite easy to work with. And I ended up doing the so-called Nefertiti bot. So it was, again, a female with a female voice, but one that is not submissive, one that is not on service, but on the contrary is challenging, in that case, the audience or the person to interact with about like how critical they really think, and about what they think where they are, because it was installed in museums, and it talked about the collections like a bit more broadly. And in the end, a lot of it was scripted and not actually generated, but it still worked, and it had this Eliza effect that people in the beginning were like, okay, I've never talked to such a like smart or critical chatbot, let's say. Yeah, so it was what I would say an anti-colonial chatbot. Super, in the end, like simple, but I mean the programmers who started it, they would not agree. Of course, they put a lot of effort in the infrastructure and how it worked. But yeah, I think so. I didn't really answer your question, but I'm coming a bit from the technology for sure, and I'm very fascinated by it. And that's, I think, why I don't just use it, but I always talk about the technology in my pieces itself too, and not just use it as a tool, actually. I use the mechanics of the mechanisms of the technology and the politics of it. Yeah.
So then, where was the transition to thinking about the heritage data that was trapped sort of in these in these European museum archives? How did that come in from the question of like this Nefertiti that talks back to you?
I mean, I guess in the end, for me, it started somehow a bit like, again, biographical, because my family still lives in Iraq. And it's like a very, there is archaeological sites and really great monuments everywhere. So it's something that, and I was never there. So I was only in the surrounding countries, and I don't know, did many things, and it's very difficult. So for me, it's also a way of connecting with a place through history, I guess. So that's the archaeology part, I think. And then it's really started off when I discovered this issue with Nefertiti, not the bot, but with the hacking of the bust of Nefertiti, which was my most popular project, I guess, at one point, where at that time I went with my duo partner I had at the time, Nikolai Nellis, to the museum and to scan the bust with a 3D scanner and then release the data set on a public domain online to address exactly the problems of public, private, who owns it, what is it actually. And since then, I just can't let it go.
You can't let it go. You wanna free the data.
Yes and no, exactly. Yeah, it's really complicated, I think, in the end, right? I think for many minorities, it's actually really good not to be in the data set and not to be seen. Can these days be a big privilege? So, and with cultural data, we have a lot of like cultural sensitive protocols that needs to be also addressed. So, yeah, it really depends on the context in the end. Yeah.
What have you done with the data?
Recording in progress.
What have you done with the data, those 10,000 items that you scraped from those various museums? Where does that live? And what do you think about where it should live? It's on your hard drive, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's not just on my hard drive, I think. It's also somewhere uploaded online in some folders for sure. But I mean, it lives already dispersed where I got it from, right? And the quality of the images was more or less poor. But that's for this project, it was not necessary or not the point. And there is, like Hito Steyl said, she wrote a really nice essay, I think, The Poor Image or so. Yeah, I mean, the aesthetics of those data sets are a field of like interest as themselves too, and I think the traces you see in the images of the artifacts themselves, but also of how they are conserved in a way, and how they are represented is very interesting and says so much about it.
But do you think that you've created a kind of shadow data set of what is out there, but you've kind of carefully chosen what goes into it. Is there a use case in which somebody else would want to use the data, and how would you feel about that?
That's a good question. Probably there are use cases where people could use it, like I think of course archaeologists or so. But in this project, for me, it was also to try to create a prototype for what I call a southern data set. That means whatever you need specifically, sometimes it's actually there. And if you use just this particular set of data, it's completely different to where you got it from. And I can recontextualize everything that is there. Yeah, I don't know. It's more really also a gesture in a way that is definitely like replicable. Yeah.
I just want a quick check-in. Kira, how are we doing for time? Would you like to switch to questions from the audience?
Hi, this is Kira. I think that you can keep your conversation going a little bit longer. We might not make it to questions from the audience today, and I think that is okay and everyone will understand.
Okay, cool.
Really? But I mean, we could still collect some. I don't know. I love questions from the audience. But yeah.
Feel free to jump in if you have some.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
keep going, but feel free to jump in. you just talked about the idea of a southern data set. Where does a southern, this is I'm sort of belaboring the point here, but I'm really think it's interesting. Can a southern data set exist on Wikidata?
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
But not every, probably. But yeah, that's always the question then of really, I guess, context. And I like one really nice example. I don't know if Wikidata, I'm sure it's capable of it, but then it needs to be like so much like also adjusted by communities that it might not even be readable by others, probably, which is completely fine. So I don't think that every data needs to be understood by everyone, even though it's accessible or so. And I learned about practices where you have like labels in the categories of data where the data is only accessible in different in certain seasons, or the data should only be accessible by women or by kids, or so I don't know if Wikipedia like Wikidata is capable of this, but I assume if it is also mediated, maybe.
Yeah.
I can maybe say something about this.
Yeah, too.
So generally, we have this idea of general purpose knowledge data for Wikidata, and we are also trying, and that's what the community is doing, to try to model data in a way that will fit the most use cases. And there are some cases, and I think what you're describing here, where it's going to be complicated for this kind of data that is modeled that way to be accepted within Wikidata. And so this is exactly why what I was explaining about the ecosystem, we also encourage people to use, for example, a wiki-based cloud that we host. So for example, the community doesn't have to bear the price of hosting. So where they can really model the data exactly how they want and have that freedom and do not have to negotiate with the general community about this. And that's something that we are working on at the moment to really have wiki-based clouds becoming more and more a host of marginalized knowledge or underrepresented data because of this reason. So that way they can model, they have the freedom, they can model data exactly how they want. But because we are building an ecosystem, the community can still benefit from being linked to the ecosystem and being able to be queried also in a relationship to Wikidata, for example. So this is the way we're thinking about it. In essence, the data is welcome on Wikidata, but there might be more hurdles sometimes for the community to be fully, to understand all the norms or to make their data fit the existing norms of Wikidata. So as much as we can, we are trying to have different way of modeling data, for example, different ways of modeling genders, is an example. But for certain way of thinking about concepts, it will just not match. And instead of trying to make something match like this, having the possibility of creating the data in this wiki-based cloud that is its own instance and its own world might be a better suited alternative in some ways. Do you see what I mean?
So in that sense, not everyone, every data needs to be kind of understandable, I guess, or even accessible from everyone, especially in this field of cultural big data, I think.
Question from the audience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. I have like a twofold question because like I'm a bit new to the topic and I missed probably some theoretical parts of it. At some point, Nora, you mentioned that it's kind of good or a privilege for some minority groups to not be represented in data sets. I don't really get that part. And also the second fold of the question is you also mentioned that some data sets it's good that only specific groups of people have access to them and they are not available to the general audience. And I also don't understand this part, if you can a bit expand.
Of course, of course.
Thank you.
I mean, the first part was more a general comment that a lot of the data is used for surveillance, basically, or for commercial purposes. So in that sense, it can be an advantage for certain, like, what's it called in English? groups that are persecuted. I'm not sure that they're actually not so visible and identifiable through the data sets, or even like understandable, if you want to say. That's just what I meant. So it's more really a highly conceptual part, and it's probably, I remember at one point many years ago where some friends there were studies that everyone is basically not trackable, even if you don't have any phone or anything with you, just because of you will know someone who has a phone, basically. And it's probably the same true as for data and somehow, but maybe not for personal data. And the other part was... Oh yeah, okay, yeah. This is very specific topic in this cultural data area field, where you have sensitive data, so-called. For example, if you have ritualistic objects or religious objects, even that some of the communities of origin, they say this should not even be touched, and it should never be photographed, and it should never be, I don't know, like it has its own set of rules how it should exist, and that's also actually true for the digital part of it. So therefore, it's not a theoretical thing, it's really practical, and it's really, I think, violating communities' boundaries and stuff in the whole world, everywhere, basically, where we talk about this kind of looted artifacts. And therefore, that stuff, for example, should never be digitized without the agreement of the communities and so on. This was what I was talking about.
That practice has been most actively developed in New Zealand and Australia with the indigenous communities there, where there's certain practices that can only be shared within certain communities and within certain people within certain communities. And some of that is ritualistic, but others is things like how to do certain kinds of weaving practices, which can only be learned, only certain knowledge can be passed by certain people. Yeah. And so there's a desire to preserve this knowledge, but preserve it for specific people.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's a bit, I think one has always to be really aware about what exactly we are talking. It's really context specific, and this notion of, what is the word? Oh, no, I can't think of it now. To respect basically the culture, where it comes from, is important.
Your body language was saying you're about to say something. Because I was thinking, like, one of the things that this butts up against is the Wikimedia practice of making all the world's knowledge available for everyone.
That was the point I wanted to make, the point about universalism. And it's just, I don't know exactly about your policies at Wikidata, but in general, the concept of universalism is problematic because who says, who decides to show what and to use what knowledge for what purpose, for example. So yeah, this is like very complex and challenging, but I think also beautiful if we address it properly. We have like a amazing variety and heterogeneity of ways of ways of interacting with data, let's say. Yeah.
I could talk a little bit more about the way in which that plays out on Wikidata that might be relevant. And that's, I did some research a couple of years ago. So it's Wikipedia, it's Wikimedia, so things might have changed. Looking at the way that race and ethnicity data was represented on Wikipedia and on Wikidata. And this is an instance where the fact that Wikidata is the cultural norms are so specific. There's a conflict between the
Recording in progress.
Should I keep going? Did I just get booted? There's a big conflict between the cultural norms of North America and of Europe, and in particular, because Wikidata is so. I mean, it's a Wikimedia Deutschland essentially shepherded and led project. The laws and norms of Germany and of other European countries about what data can and can't be recorded, right? There's very specific rules here about what kind of ethnicity data can and can't be recorded and what can and can't be asked for. Very different, but similar in France, where there's other restrictions. And so what you see in these conversations on Wikipedia and Wikidata is this conflict playing out, where even inside of a global North context, there is no universalism, even though so much of what Wikipedia and Wikimedia stands for is that universalism and this idea that there will be some consensus. But what you see is this big conflict. And so Wikipedia has more of a flexibility. English Wikipedia has more of a flexibility over that. There's less flexibility, or at least there was when I published this a couple of years ago on Wikidata, because of how much the voices in those discussions about categorization are voices from Germany and Central and Eastern Europe. And so what you see, there was like a big moment when someone was like, there's no citation on all of these Wikidata items that have the property African American on them. And so this has to be removed. Like, there's a snicker in the audience, but like, this is actually the conversation. And a lot of those were saved by some editors working with Black Lunch Table, which is a US-based Wikimedia group, to add citations to them. But many of them weren't. And there's regularly, again, at least there were when I was last closely paying attention to this about 2 years ago, regularly, like monthly efforts to remove these properties. It's not quite to the point where there's a bot that does it. I think there's a human in the loop. But there were regular, and the term that was used by these editors was cleanups. I'm just gonna let that sit there. Cleanups of ethnic terms. It's like, there's cultural norms everywhere. Even here in Germany, where there's cultural norms that are different from cultural norms elsewhere. And so it's important to always have that perspective and keep that perspective that there is no place of truth. There's always truths that are contextualized by other viewpoints.
Then we come back to the first quote I had, the configurations of power. They are not just in the data, but also in the infrastructure and in how we perceive it and so on. Yeah, no, it's complicated.
This is Kira coming from the internet. We do have a question from our YouTube audience. It was asked, both your projects came before the generative AI boom. How does that tech change the type of work you consider doing or think is important to highlight in this moment? And this can be kind of, I think, our closing question as we close out today.
I need to repeat the question, how the tech changed until now. And
so did the arrival of generative AI, or AI as generative AI, like the words AI means generative AI, and its sort of boom and craze change your approach? Did it change your approach to working with similar tools or not?
I mean, in between, I was on maternal leave when ChatGPT came for almost 2 years, and I was like, okay, that's going to be really interesting. So I was there before it, I went offline more or less before it came. And then 1 year later, not 2 years, but at one point I came back and I was like, oh, it's still the same questions. Yes, it works faster. The responses are more deceptive even, or I don't know. And now we have some discussion about it. And yes, now everyone is really using it for everything, literally. But I don't think that the mechanisms or the architecture on what it is built, it's still from the same people, right? The technology didn't really change so much for me how I look at it or even how I use it. So even these days where we have like super powerful large language models in the field, for example, of image generation, like I said, this much low cost generative adversarial networks, even better as a technology for many purposes. And the bias problem, just what we talked about, it's unfortunately it's still the same, and it's also too complicated to solve it in such a short time. So I don't know. We need a lot of patience and a lot of how do you call that? Like to control, kind of regulation. That's what that's the word, regulation. Yeah, and that takes a long time.
I would say so. When I started this project, it was before the boom. I started in scraping this data in 2022. And I was interested in, I did a project called Print Wikipedia where I turned all of Wikipedia into books. And part of what is so surreal about that is, actually, can we put that, just, we can hold that up. Martin has a copy here of the German version. So part of what's so absurd about this is that it takes a database and puts it in alphabetical order. And I was thinking about what it would mean to put images in order. And so part of my question comes from well before the question of AI. And it comes from a sort of an abiding interest into the kind of data-ness of data and what it means to be in a world awash with data, and how to understand it and be in it. And so in that sense, the questions are longstanding for me. But I think that there's a level of relevance to it that I think allows people to understand why it's important in a way that I think maybe wasn't as present before. Like everyone is aware that these are tools around us now in a way that maybe they weren't 3 years ago.
That's true, yeah. And it's definitely more around, and people are aware about it, but I don't think they're really the media literacy part is so much missing, and yeah, probably that problem got in this time where I wasn't there even more pressing.
This is Kira speaking. I do want to just invite you, each of you, if you have any kind of like closing remarks to or thoughts or questions that you want to share, and then we'll go ahead and close out today. Again, thank you all so much.
Thank you. I don't know, very difficult, but maybe just ask a chatbot a question where you already know the answer, because otherwise, yeah, it's probably not true. And the other part is about like we have to kind of reconfigure a little bit that when whatever we put in data, then a lot of things are missing, because our world is not just cannot really be represented in our emotions. That's now always called affects, which is really weird. Can also not only be represented through data or mediated. So be always aware of these limitations. I think that's very important for each of us.
Yeah, I don't need to put anything in closing. I don't think. I would just thank everyone for coming and thank everyone for having patience with all the technical difficulties.
And us.
Yeah, and thank you.
Yeah, so this is Kira. Thank you again. Thank you to everyone at Wiki Deutschland. Thank you to everyone who joined us both in person and online. Thank you to our interpreters for helping make this a more accessible space. I do want to highlight that Art and Feminism has another event coming up at the end of the month. And Sanjan, if you could do the next slide. We are doing a happy birthday Wikidata on October 29th. And we hope that you can join us for that. And with that, I will just say thank you again to everyone who is able to join. We'll be sending a follow-up email that will also have links to the talk as well. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
It's quite late.
Recording.